Good morning, and thank you so much for joining me for Daily Spark with Dr. Angela. I am your host, Dr. Angela Chester. Today, my guest is entrepreneur and author Scott-Devon. He is out of the Grand Rapids, Michigan area, and we are talking about the second death. That is also the title of his book, One Man's Quest to Avoid a Second Death in the Lake of Fire in a Modern Day, Dante's Inferno. Now, I think that that's a pretty intriguing description of this book, and I can't wait to talk about it. So let's go on and get started. Good morning, Scott. How are you? Thank you so much for joining me for Daily Spark with Dr. Angela.
Oh, thank you, Dr. Angela. I'm really excited to be here, and thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you. Now, I love the title of a good book, and I know that others do as well. But before I talk about your book, I want to ask you this question, and I purposely left this out. Didn't want to read your bio because I want to hear, who are you? We get kind of stuck on all of the wonderful ways that we write our bio, and it's so important, but there's nothing like hearing from that person who you are and how you want the world to understand who you are. So who is Scott-Devon?
Yeah, I think most of my friends would say I'm pretty much a serial entrepreneur. I've been in a lot of different businesses, but mostly entrepreneurial businesses, and I've been in traditional business like the food industry for most of my career, but I've also developed my own watch brand. I've done sculpting, I've done obviously writing and stuff. So I'm kind of the Renaissance man is what my wife refers me to. So that sums it up. But it's an all-encompassing word, entrepreneur, but it kind of defines me, I guess.
Yes, but I think as an entrepreneur, you're always being creative. You're always looking to solve the need that is of a particular group or a group of people. You're looking for the answer, and you want to be able to provide that. So I can see how you could be author and entrepreneur.
Correct. Yeah. Even in a religious sense, I've done a lot of seeking, pretty much been through every aspect of studying through religion. By no means a doctor, an expert, but just self-study. And I think that's what a lot of seekers do, whether they're entrepreneurs looking for a problem. But, I was on a quest myself, so that's why the book was important for me to put down on paper.
Definitely. And listeners, I know that many of you are also clients. Journaling is so important. Get what's in your head out on that piece of paper, and boy, does it really free it up. Now, speaking of your book, I want to ask, what was your motivation in writing The Second Death?
Well, I think like most people, I don't think I'm quite alone that the subject of the afterlife is quite fascinating, and obviously, there's a lot of different answers to that, and it's all mainly faith-based because we don't know exactly sure until we transition. But it's obviously a study from the beginning of mankind. Going back to the Bible, and then a lot of people have tackled that subject and interpretation, and I find it fascinating. So, it's a basic story of good and evil, and I think a lot of good stories are really have that as the major theme, if you really break it down to its core essence. So, so that's what happens after you die, and it's kind of using my imagination and also references to pop culture and this world, and my protagonist Henry Ford. He's not the famous Ford. He's the Ford that failed to deliver. Is kind of how I put him. And he's on this quest. So he makes a lot of mistakes. He's a sinner in this world, and he's attempting to get on the highway to heaven rather than the stairway to heaven rather than the highway to hell. And there's a lot of temptation along the way for Henry and his Ford. So that's kind of the basis of the story.
Now, for many people who believe that they have a religious understanding, we have so many different religions in the world, and even within Christianity, there are so many different denominations. One of the things that you talk about is the afterworld, but there's also this thing called purgatory. Some people believe the afterworld, the hereafter, purgatory, heaven, to be different things, and some people believe it to be the same thing. Do you address that? And if you do, how do you explain this understanding of this concept?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think how I approached it, it's such a heavy subject that I kind of approached it more as a dream, and almost like a Wizard of Oz, if you could.
Mm-hmm.
Like, is this real or fantasy?
Mm-hmm.
And there's a lot of symbolic images that happen when he first gets to the afterworld, and that are also biblically related, but it's not dogmatic. It's more fun and fantasy, and but underneath it all, I use that kind of to camouflage, maybe more of a Christianity-based approach. So, but it's fun. It's humor is a big way to get a message of point across, whether it's satire or just having people have a good time along the journey. So I use that as an effective weapon or tool, or also like something that's insightful that people can gravitate towards, and make that also part of the journey. That I think we do have to have a sense of humor along the way, otherwise it gets a little weighty. So
yeah, it really does. Now, have you found that in just general conversation, be it that it was from market research for you or in the research that you did for the book, do people still have the same understanding or importance on what happens to us after we pass away? Like, I know in centuries past, people were concerned about going to this place called purgatory. Right. But we know that in today's society, a lot of people have even fallen away from religion as a whole. Have you found in your research that people are still concerned about the afterlife or purgatory?
Well, I think purgatory was maybe more of a popular thought in this 50s, 60s than it is today. You don't really hear about it too much. Expect maybe in Catholicism you hear it more, but in general, Christianity, you don't hear a lot about purgatory. And but I think it's fascinating that after you transition into another afterworld, maybe that's where the big struggle is between good and evil. And that's kind of my take on it. That there's still a pull from heaven and hell along that way, and he also has a chance to reconcile. Redemption, I think, is obviously repentance is an important factor in my book. And he has a guide who's actually the piano man. I kind of base him off of Billy Joel. And he's his guide, like Dante. Has the guide in his book too. So he can actually go back to Earth and make amends with his past a little bit, and then go forward based on his journey. And he still has to make a lot of correct choices, and it's kind of a teens book one because it's one of three, and a lot of people haven't read 2 or 3. In fact, my mom is curious to see if Henry gets to heaven or hell. So I got kind of on the wire asking me what really happens, and I kind of enjoy that though. But book 2 and 3 are completed, and I'm thinking now of making them just one big book of about 630 pages, and then there's no really lapse in between publications of it. So that's kind of fun.
Now, you touched on a word there, and that was guides. There may be people that are unfamiliar with this term of spiritual guide. They may know what an angel is, and they're saying, well, are angels and spiritual guides the same thing? Can you explain that terminology?
Yeah, I think, it's probably more angelic than most meanings. Maybe that's probably the best way to describe it, but maybe even this person isn't fully in heaven either, but they are working their way towards heaven with their willing to help, give back kind of thing. So, I think, everybody at one point, whether it's, you can relate it here to like a teacher, a mentor, a parent, a friend, so I think in the transition, again, it's not a final destination, being purgatory, that the guides are actually very vital along the path, because they're still learning and still trying to, ascend rather than descend. That's kind of the guide. Obviously, just like life, can get frustrated, with the progress of the person, and but there's a lot of interaction between the guide's own journey and also the seeker's journey.
So in your book, would you say that a spiritual guide could also be like maybe a spiritual mentor, someone that's there to assist you and make sure you ascend as opposed to descend?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. I think, they're, they get the crown in heaven by doing good works, and not that, it's at least in this realm that they're there to guide towards heaven, not towards hell. So they're on the side of maybe the good angel on the shoulder versus the other side. So it's pulling them towards the good rather than the bad. So they are helpful, but like life, we don't always listen. So that's part of the conflict of the story.
Right. And it's so funny that you mentioned the angel on the shoulder, because I am old enough to remember those cartoons when we had the good angel on one shoulder and the little, the little devil on the other. And they don't really show that as much anymore. Not knocking new cartoons or anything like that, but I think that was really important for the generations that saw that. It taught you about consequences and having a conscience and trying to lean towards doing what was good as opposed to always maybe what was comfortable or what everyone else was doing. So yeah, I can understand that. Now, there's another concept that you talk about in the book, and that is the sins of the father. Can you explain what is that? Is that something that you created, or is that a something?
Well, that's always like the historical aspect of the three generations of sin, and to break that cycle. And that's really where my protagonist Henry is faced with, because his father was defined as probably at least on Earth as a really bad person, very much a con man, very much a womanizer, drinker. Had all the sins pretty much, but it was also very charismatic and larger than life. And the son's trying to break that pattern. He wasn't so successful on Earth, but he's got a little more help up the next level. And but it's also they also meet in purgatory, and which is a fascinating subject. So the father and son dynamic is also one that is very common in literature, just like good and evil. And to overcome the sins of the father or inherit the blessings of the father are also a little bit like that angel on each shoulder. So he confronts those. He confronts his father, things that he had unresolved on Earth, and at one point, I won't give it away, but at one point they do reconcile, and then they don't. But you never know. Parent-children relationships are so always complicated, even the afterworld.
Yes. And you just never know. Like you said, you never know what can happen. And I think someone is probably out there nodding their head saying, that's right. We were talking last month, but right now it's kind of touch and go. So yeah, I can exactly. I can definitely understand that. I love it. Well, before we go to a break, Scott, I want to make sure that everyone is able to not only pick up a copy of your book, but also follow you online. So if you could please, where should people go, and where can we get a copy of your book?
Yeah, I think the easiest place is my website. It's devonauthor, devonauthor.com, devonauthor.com, and then Amazon.com has the book online as well. So those are the two probably easiest places that people can go and read some reviews or access and learn more about it.
Alrighty, listeners, well, you know where to go. So we need to take a short break, but we'll be back and continue this conversation with Scott-Devon. We'll be back right after this. And we are back. Thank you so much for joining me for Daily Spark with Dr. Angela. I am your host, Dr. Angela Chester. My guest today is entrepreneur and author Scott-Devon. He is the author of The Second Death. So today, we're talking about one man's quest to avoid a second death in the lake of fire in modern-day Dante's Inferno. Now, I love the picture, the picture that you paint there for but it's about the second death. So we're not talking about our first death, like what makes us leave, our physical world here, but we're talking about this after place that we go. And I don't think that people talk about it as much as they used to. So this is really exciting to do. Now, I want to ask you about Satan. Some people say Lucifer, some people say the devil, he's been called Diablo, all of these names. Who is this person called Satan or Lucifer, and what is his purpose? How does he interact in your book?
Yeah, I think my take on Satan or the devil, or the many names that he's been called, is a little bit unique. I mean, he's more of a Luciferian type person, that he's more seductive. He's a very extremely talented musician, but he gets bored. He has a sinful mind, so he's subject to temptations that are maybe common to mortals rather than immortals. But he uses the power of seduction. He's not necessarily the one that in the past where we think, has the devil costume with the fork and the horns, and he's not that guy. He's one that can, slide into anything and win everybody over, almost like a modern day rock star or a celebrity.
Right,
so
right.
His celebrity, and I could count countless examples of those. No, just kidding. But that he could relate to. But he's also selfish. Again, he has these mortal traits, and he uses those to maybe not be the best devil at one point, because he gets bored, he does his own thing, and he doesn't care. He doesn't, but it's also a very human type devil that's even to be a little scarier sometimes. That he becomes more realized than maybe a distant one, and so I find him fascinating. I find him very layered. But at one point, he's on the wrong side. So, you got to be extra careful of his what he's offering, and because he wants your soul, and he's going to do everything to get it. But he'll do it with maybe a smile rather than a knife. But complicated character. Yeah.
And I'm so glad that you brought the Lucifer side of him out, as opposed to maybe like the Satan or the devil side, like you said, not the guy in the red suit with the forked tail, but the slickster, the person who kind of comes in and can smooth talk the situation, because I think that really is where, as human beings, we fall victim, and we may not mean to it, and we might think that we're really savvy and smart, or I'm an educated person. I would never fall prey to such a thing, but many times people do, and we forget about that personality, if you will, of who he is and how he's able to attack us. So thank you. Thank you for doing that.
Just to add another to that layer, that I think it's been told that's also his. I don't know where it came from, but it's pretty common that he doesn't want you to know he exists. That's his power. So he kind of brings that to life. So. Right.
Because as long as people doubt his existence, then they will not resist. So that is so true. Yeah, and I always found that phrase to be so interesting. Like, it's one of those things that cause you to kind of pause and go, yeah, that's a good one. So if you want to get the conversation started for Thanksgiving, there's a question.
Let's talk about politics.
Right, let's talk about politics. Let's talk about religion. Let's see how many people are left at the end.
Right.
I hear you. Now, many times when we talk about God, kind of looking at the flip side of the coin, many times when we talk about God, people believe that God is either very much in your life, or he is somewhat aloof or a little standoffish, that sometimes he's silent in the way that he interacts with us. What side or what personality do you feel that you discuss more when it comes to God and who he is in your book?
Yeah, in my book, I have more of a silent God, that you need to listen more than most to get the message. But it's also based on my belief in free will, and that this is how it's kind of set up. And he's definitely a God of love, a God of but one you have to listen to and accept rather than maybe be pursued by. So that's kind of a little twist to the book too that comes to play. That the devil is more of a character where that you can identify, or at least in a moral sense of like on earth. But God is still very mysterious and very much maybe not giving you all the answers that unless you're listening.
But I think people have, and I like your take on that, because I think that so many times, especially in our society today, we're so used to the nanosecond answer. Everything is so quick, everything is so fast, and we forget to kind of settle ourselves and to listen and to be still and to be quiet. That if we ask God for something, He doesn't always say it in a loud, booming voice. That sometimes it is something that you need to be still for and wait for that. I like that.
Yeah, and I think there's also an aspect of surrender that works. At least in my spiritual journey, that works a lot more. And again, the listening and being quiet, and because you're right, there are so many distractions and noise, and Satan's one of those. The ones that beats the drum. So but life's like that too, in my experience.
And when you said surrender, it made me think of the song "I Surrender All," and most people enjoy that song because it is an opportunity for you to, if you hadn't thought about it before, while you sing the song, it's, oh yeah, I do surrender all. I do give it all to God. That's my problem. I've been trying to handle it all myself. Here, let me
that's what He wants.
Yeah. Let me give it back to Him and allow Him to deal with it for me.
Yeah.
Now, one of the things that we hear about is this lake of fire. Be it that you are coming at this from a theological point of view, or perhaps you've just come across it in a movie and it's like, what is this hell lake of fire? Do you address that in your book? And if so, how do you explain what it is?
Well, for me, it's Revelations in the New Testament. That's very, very much maybe a mysterious and confusing part of the Bible for most people. But for me, I gravitate towards those things because I'm, a dreamer, a visionary, a seeker. So I really found that they're very like, wow, I want to follow that path, or like try to understand it, or dream about it, or meditate about it, or whatever, contemplate about it. So, I still find it. Obviously, I'm not giving answers, as a prophet, but I'm listening to what this dream world is, and that's kind of where my book goes, and using the imagination that was really inspired by Revelation, and the lake of fire is obviously where you don't want to end up, and they talk about the second death, in Revelations as well, and so again, it's not a book necessarily. Some people would probably even say it's very secular, but there's some very underlying themes that are very much consistent biblically.
Now, would you say that your book is for the religious person, for a spiritual person, for someone who's just interested in religion, or is it it's kind of open for anyone if you're a philosopher or if you just want a good read? Okay.
Yeah, I think I've got a really good review by Kirkus, and they said innovative, original, and entertaining. So I think they summed up those words that it's open. It's not necessarily you have to be Catholic or Protestant or whatever.
Okay.
It's open to maybe more open though to seekers and the dreamer and all of us, and people that are curious, like what's going to happen next.
Right. Okay. Now, I think a concept that most people are familiar with in very generic terms are good and evil. We have good and bad, and we talked about that even with the little angels or so on your shoulder. In your book, do you address or do you give an idea of what is good And then what is evil? Do they have characteristics or traits or habits?
They do, but again, it's a little bit of a tease to book 3, and things are, the bow's wrapped up tidy at the end of 3. It even gets into the Antichrist and things. It gets a little more serious towards the end of book 3, but book 2 is very, very interesting and funny too, and so I'm kind of hoping that the reader enjoys the journey and is entertained along the way. But there's some messages, but it doesn't hit you over the head. You're kind of like, you have to see what you gravitate toward, but again, at one point, I hope they want to know what's going to happen to these characters, which, they're fictional characters, and but they become real because they're in my head or they're on the page or somebody reads them and identifies with that person. Or and again, these are universal themes, so most people can relate to those.
And since we're talking about good and evil, I want to ask you, and hopefully we have time for this in this particular segment, and that's about the word repentance. Again, if we think about in our childhoods, we used to hear people talking about, or even seeing signs that says, repent. The time is near. And you really don't see that quite as much anymore. Do you address repentance? And if so, what is it? How do we get it? Can we keep it? Do we give it away? What is this thing?
Yeah, well, I guess I grew up a Southern Baptist, and my mom was a Bible teacher, but my father was Serbian Orthodox, and then I started my own journey. I'm a practicing Catholic right now, but I've kind of been through everything, Quaker or whatever, and studying personally and mystics and anyway. But at the end of the day, it's still a complicated issue. But repentance, I think, is very key towards being in that surrender position again, that you're open, you're listening, you're quiet, the noise is gone, the distractions are gone. And that's where I look at, again, on a basic level of good and evil. So, again, the devil's trying to dissuade you, tempt you, steer you in the wrong direction, whereas, then you have the guide trying to steer you towards repentance, towards the virtues, towards, the way, the path, the glory and to heaven. So that's the summation. It's obviously completely colorful between A and B and gray, and but that's what makes us such a wonderful species that we are.
Well, it is almost time for us to take a break again, and I just love how when you're having really good conversation, time seems to really fly. Scott, I want to make sure that everyone is able to follow you online as well as pick up a copy of your book. Where can we get a copy, and how do we make sure that we can follow you online?
Sure. Yeah, my author website is Devon Author. It's spelled DEVON, author, AUTHOR.com. And then Amazon is very wonderful as far as their service, and Amazon.com would be a great source. You can either buy it directly from me or on Amazon, and feel free to drop me a line on my website, and I'll respond and answer any questions or talk about the book more.
Alrighty, listeners, you know where to go. Well, we need to take a very short break. We'll be back right after this.
Being a new mom brings lots of worries. One of my biggest worries with my little one was bath time. That was until I found the Omni Bath Visor. Now your little one can be protected from ear infections and dry drowning. Just slip the Omni Bath Visor over your baby's head at bath time, and water rolls right over the bill. Plus, the Omni Bath Visor is recommended by leading pediatricians. Bath time has never been more fun without the tears or phobias. Buy your Omni Bath Visor today on Amazon.
Hi everyone, Dr. Angela here. Did you know that Daily Spark is now on Facebook? That's right, you can visit with me at facebook.com/Daily Spark with Dr. Angela. I want to know more about what you're thinking. I'd love to know which interview did you find the most entertaining or the most informative. I want to talk to you, and I want you to be able to talk to me. Simply visit facebook.com/Daily Spark with Dr. Angela.
And we are back. Thank you so much for joining me for Daily Spark with Dr. Angela. I am your guest, Dr. Angela Chester. I have a really awesome guest today. He is an entrepreneur. He is an author. His name is Scott-Devon. He is the author of The Second Death. And if you were on with us earlier, then you heard him kind of tease that there may be some other books in the works, but we're not going to jump ahead too much, but I'm definitely going to ask that question. I want to make sure that we fully cover this book, The Second Death. So, Scott, my next question for you is, we've talked about good and evil, we've talked about the lake of fire, Satan versus Lucifer, all of that. So I have to ask then about heaven and hell. How do you address these destinations, these locations in your book?
Yeah, it's a little bit peek into the second and third book, but heaven is pretty much saved along the path till the end of the book, and not to give it away, but there is an understanding, a vision that's I think it's again I using my imagination, but it's hopefully very pure. But the reality of hell is also explained, and again I don't try to make my book overly dogmatic, but there's parts where there are some, it's violent at some points. There's killings. There's there's people suffering, but it's explained in a way that is similar to maybe Dante's Divine Comedy, where he doesn't go away from the fact that you're going to see Inferno and you're going to see Paradise. So so it does address those. It addresses them pretty briefly. I don't think anybody's going to get violently ill, hopefully, but there are some realities of this, existence that we have that do involve pain and suffering, and for what happens. So there's consequences, and again, but I think people can relate to those, and they're not unintended. They're very much part of the plot and part of the story.
Now, like I said, you kind of hinted at the sequels, and I know you can't give too much away. Do you have sequels? Is there maybe more than one book that you're thinking about, or maybe just one more? What's your thought on how the sequels are developing in your head?
Yeah, well, they're written right now in manuscript form, and I'm just in the editing process currently. But I'm hoping now to, instead of just releasing book 2, since book 3 is completed, I'm going to make one big book of over 600 pages, and so my readers can enjoy it all at once. And but there's some interesting characters in book 2 that I can kind of reveal. Satan actually has twin girls. And
wow!
They are also very much of a pop star type mentality, and are very very charming, very talented, and there's music and contests and things that related even to today's American Idol and things like that. So I draw a lot of even if the afterlife. The afterlife is also inspired by what's going on Earth and popular culture, and there's characters that show up, like the Beatles show up, and and it's just kind of magical where you don't have any boundaries as far as who you can resurrect and who might be showing up in these places. So it was fun to delve into seeing John Lennon sing again, or the Beatles back together again. So there's some of that going on, and then into book 3, it gets, like I say, a little bit more serious. The devil also has a son that becomes the Antichrist, so and goes back to Earth, and so and he's much more of a serious character. He actually develops a cure for a modern day plague and becomes the hero of the world. It very much follows again the New Testament, and then it's all kind of resolved where all these characters come back together in a big climax. So that's kind of how at least the explanation of what's going to transpire without giving away the ending.
Right. That's right. You got to buy the book, folks, to get the ending.
It's always that.
That's right. That's right. You have to do that. But, I love how you have taken the time to give a personality to each person, like a true personality, so that we can follow along in the story where you're thinking like, oh, my goodness, this person or this personality is like this particular person that we kind of see here, like in real time, and it opens your eyes, and you go, "Oh, wow, that is amazing." It is getting to be a quite interesting world that we live in right now. So I think this book is just very much on time. Just very much on time. Now, I want to totally and completely kind of shift the paradigm a little bit, and I love picking the brain of authors. For those that are out there that are thinking about, I think I have a book inside of me, or they may have a friend prompting them that they really need to share their story. So I'm going to ask you some questions that's kind of along that vein. The number one question that I always ask is about environment and atmosphere. We used to see in the movies where someone would say, I'm going to write a book. They pack up their stuff. They go to the log cabin out in the middle of nowhere, or they're at the lake, and they pound out this book. For some people, they need that. For other people, they don't. Do you need a particular writing environment in order to be productive in your writing?
Not necessarily. I pretty much work really quickly, at least on the first draft. And that's when it's really fun. I just need a quiet space. Whether I actually write a lot on the airplane sometimes, and I find that kind of like an interesting dynamic. But anywhere that's quiet, I can sit in a room and just not be bothered, I guess, is the only thing, or disrupted. Once you're on a roll, I write at night a lot. I find that, again, where it's quiet and your mind's kind of quieting down and things. So so as long as there's not outside stimulus, I write pretty quickly. Right. Now, the other aspect of writing is the rewriting, and that's where it becomes more of a chore. And you deal with your editor, and you got to switch this around, and and do the grammar correctly, and so it becomes more technical at that point. But the first draft is very much maybe more inspirational, more of a feel, but obviously it becomes a better book with the discipline that comes later on the rewrites.
Now, would you find that when you're writing, does it tend to energize you, or does it kind of exhaust you? Like, if you write for a few hours, is it, yep, I've done a full day's work today, or do you find you're fired up and ready to keep cranking out another chapter?
Well, I think what I've heard also and read about a lot of writers too. I also have this weakness that I'm good if I can sit down, but I'll come up with a million reasons not to sit down before they play paper. and again, when I hear that, I just go, okay, yeah, now I get it. That's me. And but once I sit down, I can sit down, and time doesn't matter. And I might sit down for 7-8 hours sometimes, and just it feels like 2 minutes, But boy, getting down there and just sitting my butt down in a chair and starting to think and with my computer now. I used to write longhand, but now I mostly write on my computer.
Oh, wow.
And so I've kind of transitioned from old school to new school. And but the ideas come. Again, it's again back to kind of what I talked about in the first book, where I need that quietness, I need the contemplation time, I need a little bit get in that world, rather than and it becomes kind of real, and again you develop a really a likeness for these characters that don't exist materially, but they exist in your mind and your imagination, and they become, again, you're probably drawing from characters in your own life that you've met, but a combination of people, but and experiences. But it is also like, at one point I care about that character and what happens to him, and I think that's the secret sauce along the way. If you can get the reader's attention to care about what happens.
Now, you mentioned something, and for our younger generation, our millennials out there, our world is very much like on our phones or on our laptops. And you said that you used to write everything out in longhand. Now, I am one of those people who remember having to write things down before there were, computers were so easily accessible to us. Have you found, just personally, is there a difference for you in being able to just physically write down your thought as opposed to typing your thought?
Yeah.
Does it do something to you as an author?
It took me a long time, frankly, because the first draft, like I said, was more, I actually enjoyed the physicality of it, and it almost gets to where you get a, kind of like you're working out, you get sweaty a little bit, or you look at the paper, and it's physical action of writing, putting pen to paper, and there's something there, but it's also laborious when we sit down to do rewrites, which is more on the computer, and adjusting things, and it's a lot easier, obviously, than going back through your notes. And I'm not a very my penmanship wasn't my strength, so I think the computer helps me quite a bit in a lot of instances. But I did make that transition, and it is once you get into it, it's good. But I still write notes out longhand and stuff, and have a bunch of sticky notes all over the place. So it's a kind of a combination of new and old ways.
Because it's still something like I still have my father's old IBM typewriter, and I remember my son sitting down in front of the typewriter like, what is this? When he was a little kid, like, what is this thing? And it's like, sometimes it's nice to do the things that are traditional as well as using the modern amenities. And I like how you said you still do some longhand, but there's nothing like the convenience of the computer. I have to agree with you on that. Now, if you could tell your younger self about writing, is there a particular nugget? Is there a bit of wisdom? Is there something that you would tell your younger self when it comes to the writing that you've done recently?
Well, I kind of go back to some of my heroes that I listened to or read books about on writing, and it is something that's a calling, probably. I think if you're good at it, you have to have a talent to it, but a lot of it is just you've got to deal with a lot of rejection, and life deals with that too. But I think you're really putting yourself out there, and if you have. The problem is, a lot of great writers are very sensitive, and artists or musicians and things. So you're always you're always dealing with that as far as like, this is my baby. You take it so personal, and that's what makes it good, but it also makes you maybe quit, at one point where you're not getting that affirmation, and a lot of the creative worlds you're not. And so, fortunately, I've got, blessed with perseverance, but I've been disappointed, over the years too. But but then you get validation along the way that keeps you going. And at one point, what are you really doing it for? Are you doing it for fame, fortune? Probably, if you are, you're probably not going to make it. So it's more of a craft that you develop and get better at, I think, over time. But then there's some people that can write it when they're 10 years old. That's brilliant. So you just never know. But for me, it's always been maybe more of a plotter than I am a boy genius, but I also find that kind of interesting too. That you just I think David Mamet said you just sit down and bleed, and I believe that. Not for the faint of heart.
That's right. I think, like you said, that being so many times we think of a calling as something that only applies to clergy, but I use that term to very specifically mean, is it something that you have been purposed to do? And if that's something that you are supposed to do, whatever it is, then that's your calling for this life. And I think that you're right with authors, and especially with artists in particular. We are sensitive. But that's what makes us awesome, because we're sensitive, we're able to kind of absorb what others give to us, kind of maybe flip it on its ear a little bit, and be able to re-articulate it in a way that it applies to everyone, and everyone is able to learn the lesson from that. Well, Scott-Devon, I want to say thank you so much for being a guest here on Daily Spark. I have truly enjoyed my time with you today.
Well, thank you very much, Dr. Angela, and I appreciate the opportunity and even more inspired to write more after talking and chatting with you today and your listeners.
Thank you. Well, definitely, when the next book or books come out, please be sure to come back and share it with our audience. I think we will definitely want to hear about it because this book is awesome. We definitely want to hear about that. And speaking of books, one last time, if you would please, sir, let us know, how do we follow you online and where can we pick up a copy of The Second Death?
Yes, my website is Devon Author, D-E-V-O-N, author, AUTHOR.com. And there's ways to order the book there, or conveniently you can go to Amazon.com and buy the book there. Or but if you feel like corresponding, tell me how you like the book. I love feedback. So my author site is very interactive, and please contact me if you have any questions or would like to know more.
All righty. Well, listeners, you now know exactly what it is that you need to do, and I want to thank you as well for tuning in to Daily Spark with Dr. Angela. And as always, may the Lord continue to shine His face upon you. May you receive His grace and His mercy in all that you do. Until next time, everyone, have an awesome day. Be blessed in the Lord. Bye-bye.